She sees the garage door open. Her husband's car is there with the engine running. The headlights are on, and illuminated by those headlights is her husband, Macquarie Fleet Specialist Jim Yates, dead.
Yeah.
Bashed. The most extraordinary thing is revealed, that yes, he has been bashed around the head, but there appears to be a puncture in his chest between, I think, was the third and the fourth rib of a hypodermic needle.
I'm Andrew Rule. This is Life and Crimes. Last week we spoke at length to Peter FitzSimons about his new book about a great Australian, Weary Dunlop. But along the way he mentioned that there was an aspect of the Weary Dunlop story that many of us don't know, and that is that Weary's great friend, fellow surgeon, and in fact best man, a man called Jim Yates, quite a remarkable man in his own right. Jim Yates, I think, was one of 5 Yates brothers from Toowoomba in Queensland, 2 of whom played cricket for their state, all of whom were very clever, hard-working, ambitious men who made it. I think they were all medicos, or pretty well. Most of the 5 were successful in medicine, and that is why Jim Yates came to meet Weary Dunlop when they were abroad.
Don't let the cat out of the bag.
No, I won't. Now, Peter, you're fairly intimately acquainted with this part of the story, although
Yeah.
I have brushed up against this story in the past, and it does intrigue me. Where did Weary and Jim Yates meet?
Well, again, thank you for having me on your highly regarded show. And it was fascinating to chat to you the other day, because there are very few people that know anything about this story. And so it's a joy for me to chat to you. But so this is an extraordinary story. Weary Dunlop with Jim Yates. When Weary Dunlop, as I mentioned to you, goes to study surgery in England, and he goes to London, and it was like that line from, was it William Wordsworth? Bliss was it in that dawn to be alive, but to be young was very heaven. Young men, they're in London, they're chasing women, they're expanding their surgical skills, they're exploring new worlds, they're loving everything about it. And he and Jim Yates become the very best of friends. They then go to the Middle East, working in Jerusalem. I think Jim Yates joined him briefly in Tobruk.
Yep.
And then when they were imprisoned, Jim Yates, I think from memory, they're separated, goes to New Guinea.
Yep.
But after the war is over, I'll have to choose my words carefully here, because Weary Dunlop had been what is known as a man of the world. And a man of the world, it was the vernacular at the time. If you were a man of the world, you probably didn't go to your wedding day as a virgin.
Right.
Would be a part of it. He'd been a man of the world on the liners on the way over to England. He'd been a man of the world in London. He'd been a man of the world in Paris. He was a man of the world. He had an affair after the war was over with Lady Mountbatten, allegedly.
So did Gandhi, they say.
I am told that was the case too. And I'd suspect Lord Mountbatten probably was liberal with his own favours, and good luck to him.
Yeah.
But the point is that when Weary gets back to Australia, there has been a very fine woman that he hasn't seen, Helen, who's been waiting for him for .3 carry 1 subtract 2, 8 years.
Good
He
Lord.
has not seen her for 8 years. They've been engaged to be married for 7 of those years. And he lands first at Cape York. He gets to Sydney, and he has a crisis of confidence that, what have I been doing? I'm in no shape to marry this wonderful woman who's been waiting for me. I'm not fit. He calls his best mate, Jim Yates, Colonel Jim Yates, who comes to Sydney Airport, gets him, takes him to Bondi Beach. They spend the afternoon on Bondi Beach. Jim talks him through it and says, you'll be okay. These things happen. I'm sure Helen will either understand or you don't tell her, whatever it was. He goes, takes him back to Sydney Airport, puts him on the plane, kicks somebody else off to put Weary on it. Weary lands at Essendon Airport that night. At midnight, Helen's waiting for him. They get married 2 weeks later. Jim Yates is the best man.
Yep.
Now, that's not where the story ends. For me, one of the things for me is when I'm doing these other books, you come across these stunning stories. And even though the story I'm about to tell is only tangentially connected to Weary, it's still just an amazing story, which is my chief care. From memory, it was early 60s, I think October 1961. By this point, Colonel Jim Yates is a famous Macquarie Street specialist living in the salubrious suburb of Vaucluse. And one morning at 5:30 a.m, his wife Diana comes out to the garage. She sees the garage door open. Her husband's car is there with the engine running. The headlights are on, and illuminated by those headlights is her husband, Macquarie Street specialist Jim Yates, dead.
Yeah.
Bashed around the head. She calls the police. The police come. They take the body to the coroners. They do an examination of the body, and the most extraordinary thing is revealed, that yes, he has been bashed around the head, but there appears to be a puncture in his chest between, I think, was the third and the fourth rib of a hypodermic needle. They test the heart. They establish that the heart has got an overdose of adrenaline in it, that the most likely cause of death, or the certain cause of death, was not the bashing around the head, but it was somebody had put a hypodermic needle in it, pressed it, and given him an overdose of adrenaline, which had killed him. There is a coroner's inquest, and before the coroner's inquest takes place, the police get a tip-off that another Macquarie Street specialist by the name of Eric Hedberg, I think you've got the name there, Hedberg.
That's it.
Because we don't want to be maligned somebody else's
No.
name. If we were doing this absolutely properly, we'd do it in the police fashion, and we'd say
Yes.
Eric John Jones Hedberg with 2 or 3 middle names, whatever they are.
Exactly.
But another Macquarie Street specialist and a former acquaintance of both Weary and Jim Yates had been having an affair with his wife Diana. Not only that, they establish in the coroner's inquest, there is the maid of Diana who basically testifies to this effect. There are further suspicious things in that Hedberg's wife had died, I think, 6 months earlier.
Yep.
And she had complained to her sister, I think my husband is trying to poison me.
Yes.
There are other circumstantial evidence to the effect that it is established that Hedberg had purchased adrenaline from a particular chemist a short time before. His account was, yes, I did, but it was stolen from my car, and this has been done to frame me. Expert testimony is put forward to the fact that when it came to Jim Yates' body, whoever killed him was a very skilled medical practitioner, because if you and I were trying to kill each other, I don't know which rib to put the hypodermic needle between, but it was done by a seriously qualified medical person. Circumstantially, and I don't say this is true because I don't know, but circumstantially, all the evidence points to the fact that the murderer of Jim Yates was Eric Hedberg. And so that was what the papers were filled with. And we have to say, because it's the truth, all of this alleged, nothing of it is proven, even though, defamation law doesn't apply here because the man himself is long dead. But certainly it is fair to say the heavy suspicion was placed on Hedberg as the murderer of Jim Yates. The coroner, however, the phrase I believe was, there is not one scintilla of hard evidence that establishes that a murder has taken place. Mr. Hedberg, you are free to go.
Can I suggest, Peter, that those things used to happen in Sydney courts quite a bit?
Go on, tell me.
I'm just suggesting that sometimes outcomes, as with horse races, could be known ahead, and perhaps that race was fixed, maybe.
Well, in this case, the fascinating thing is that despite the heavy suspicion, despite the opprobrium coming his way, despite the whispers, 4 years later, Eric Hedberg marries Diana Yates.
Yes.
And they live happily ever after. And so it's just, tell me, because I'm fascinated, this is your field. What do you know? It was known as the hypodermic needle murder.
Needle in the heart murder. As you've explained it, it was actually a year earlier. It happened in spring 1960, which doesn't matter much. It's exactly as you said. It strikes me that was Hedberg's reticence about bashing a man literally to death that caused him to use the hypodermic, which of course was the clue that gave him away ultimately. Had he just kept bashing, No one would know that it was done by a doctor. They would think probably a robbery if he'd bashed him until he died and then taken his wallet and sort of emptied it of money and thrown it into a garden next door. Everyone would have thought it was a mugging of some sort. But hypodermic is what gives it away.
Right, this is your field and not mine. So I'm sure you've done dozens of crimes and murder cases. Yeah. So my question to you, in this case, when you have that we've established that Hedberg was having an affair with the wife of the murder victim.
Yes.
We established that he did buy adrenaline.
Yeah.
There is further suspicion that Hedberg's own wife had allegedly died by poisoning, and that she had confided to her sister, and that had confided to her sister, I think he's trying to poison me, and that after she had died, there was an amazingly quick, I think, cremation before anybody friends knew.
Yes.
It's not, so what my question to you is, when it is obvious that the circumstantial evidence is so strong pointing towards his guilt, is there in law, is there nothing where you say, listen, the circumstantial evidence here is so strong, is just so strong that it's no longer circumstantial because the only outcome that fits everything that we can see
is murder.
Is that a murder took place.
And they are reluctant, purely circumstantial cases have been successful, but they're reluctant to go with it. However, I would suggest that this case, and I take back what I said about Sydney because Melbourne has a similar case. I just remembered. Lady Ryler, who was the ever-loving or not ever-loving wife, the estranged wife of the then Chief Secretary, I think he was called. The Chief Secretary in the old days, in the 60s, was to the right hand of the Premier. He was really the Premier's right-hand man, the chief cook and bottle washer of the state cabinet was the Chief Secretary, who was essentially he would be like a police minister as well as other functions. So the Chief Secretary was a very powerful person in the state government. Anyway, Lady Ryler was a founding member. She helped set up the Girl Guides in Australia. She was a very successful veterinary surgeon. She had her own column in the then very powerful Herald newspaper, with the great evening newspaper of those days. And she was a successful and strong-minded woman in her own right. She and he had clearly fallen out of love. He was a womanizer. He was having an affair or a string of affairs. And in fact, they were living like Yates and his wife. They were sort of living apart inside their large double-storey house in Kew, which is a solid and respectable suburb in Melbourne. And one morning, at around the time the great Ryler was conducting his affair with this woman that worked in his office or whatever it was, his wife, Lady Ryler, goes out very early in the morning, and apparently, Peter, she fell over on the garden path and repeatedly hit her head on a spade, which killed her. And that was very sad. And she also, like Mrs. Yates, was rushed quickly to the coroner's office, which was a pretty rough affair in those days, down by the Yarra, a very smelly, horrible place with rats in it. And there was a very cursory and quick post-mortem done, and then they burnt her body within something like 3 days. She was cremated.
Right. And was the finger of suspicion was pointed at the...
Never as strongly as in the Yates case. Ryler was never charged. It was alluded to. It was known about by certain people. I'd never heard of it until a friend of mine, John Sylvester, who's a career crime writer.
Famous career.
His father was Fred Sylvester, who was an assistant commissioner of police, and his father told John a long time ago that Ryler was always very friendly and nice to members of the homicide squad because they had an understanding relationship where but they would get bottles of whiskey at Christmas time and they would get leave or whatever it was. And it was an open secret in the police force that's what had happened. He was never charged. He married the other woman and lived, happily or unhappily ever after.
And I hasten to add at this point, even though defamation laws don't apply when somebody is dead,
Yes.
these remarks are being made by Andrew Rule.
Not by you.
Not Peter FitzSimons of the Sydney Morning Herald.
Absolutely true, but they're all dead and buried. I did go and find an old man in a nursing home who was connected with the family in some way. I forget how. But even all their children are dead now. It's a good story. I think it's only really been written once, but there was an allusion to it by the late Peter Ryan, who was a very fine historian, author, essayist and columnist down here for years. A World War II veteran, a very interesting man. He wrote a piece for the Nation, I think, magazine it was called, which was a pretty good magazine in the 60s. It was a national magazine. It was fairly sophisticated. It was possibly a little bit like Time. It was a good magazine. He'd written a column about this, which someone tipped me off to, and I went to the Melbourne Library, to the State Library, and I was pointed out that this magazine had been kept in all these leather-bound folders, and it had only been published for a decade, and it each year had its leather folder, and each folder had its 12 editions of this monthly magazine. And one of these magazines, I'll say number 19, had this story by Peter Ryan, which would tell me all about, or tell me some things about this alleged crime. And I went to the library and I went to the shelves. I got permission to go into the bit where the public can't go. And they pulled out not 20 of these leather-bound volumes, but 19. The appropriate one was missing. It had been taken. And it had disappeared. Wow. And this is how the wealthy and the powerful clean up after themselves. Abe Saffron did the same thing in Sydney. There was nothing left in public libraries or in the parliamentary library in Sydney to implicate Abe Saffron in anything. And the same had happened in Melbourne with the Ryler thing. And in the end, I got a copy of that magazine in Sydney, not in Melbourne.
Hi, it's Gary Jubilant here. Do you want a real and raw look inside the world of crime? Well then check out my podcast, I Catch Killers, where I interview people from all sides of the law.
I draw my firearm and I went into fight mode. I wanted to find and confront this gunman.
I'm not getting verbal, am I?
I shouldn't have trusted you. See, I'm trying to open my mind up to defence powers.
I know, it's just begging to be said.
Yeah, fair call, fair call. We have amazing guests every week. Search for I Catch Killers wherever you get your podcasts.
Let me ask you this. This is meant to be you interviewing me and not me interviewing you.
Yes, but let's switch hats for a minute.
It doesn't matter. But given this is your absolute métier, off the top of my head, if you went around the capital cities of Australia and said most famous crimes, I'll say from Sydney, probably the most famous crime, and I'm sure you know it, is the Shark Arm murder.
Yeah, that and Graham Thorne, I guess.
Graham Thorne, which I wrote about in my book on the Opera House, which is an amazing story.
Great story.
One day, in fact, if you ever let me back on your show, I know that story backwards and forwards because I did that.
You're on
the Opera House. The Shark Arm murder. So those two, Graham Thorne and the Shark Arm murder, in Melbourne, would it be the one you've just? What's the most famous Melbourne crime?
The case of Lady Ryler. It's fascinating. It's a great dinner party story that we've just told to each other. But it's not famous. It's not famous. It's really something that was really only known to a few hundred people, but in recent years I did dig it up and write about it, and beyond that, it's not famous at all. It probably should be.
What is the most famous one in Melbourne?
Oh, notorious Easy Street, which Easy Street murders two young women killed in Easy Street, Collingwood, in 1977. And 48 years later, that is only last year, the Victorian police caused to be arrested in Rome a Greek-Australian citizen. An Australian citizen of Greek extraction who's been brought back to Australia from Rome, where he was briefly visiting and was arrested at the airport. He's been brought back and he is facing committal proceedings.
How very odd that in Sydney, like I read, I devour the news. How very odd that north of the Murray, and I'm connected to the news. Yeah. I never heard of that one. Tell me to move on. Let's say Adelaide. The most famous will be the
Beaumonts, followed by the family, what they call the family killings of all the young men.
Well, the
Snowtown's another one, yeah.
Snowtown.
Adelaide's full of it, really.
Okay, so Adelaide known as the city of churches and strange murders.
Yeah.
When we go to Perth, was there not a Claremont killer? Am I right?
There was your Claremont killer, and there was also some they're bent coppers over there. There's some very shady things in Perth involving police and crooks. The Mickelberg stitch-up, the Perth Mint was robbed of gold.
Okay.
And then these crooks who probably did it were framed with it anyway by some tough bent coppers, one of whom was later blown up by bikies, literally blown to bits with a bomb, gelignite attached to his car. There's some pretty good crimes in Perth. But it's
when I did Kim Beasley's biography in the late 90s, and Kim grew up in Claremont.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I'm familiar with the Claremont murders.
Yeah.
What about Darwin, Brizzy and Hobart?
Brizzy's got its share. Well, one that jumps out, of course, is the fine cotton ring-in, but it involved the people who did get people murdered.
Did anybody in fine cotton ever do time, or was it only that? I thought
they did.
Who was that?
Hayden Haitana, the trainer. Robert North, who was a bloke I know. He's not very well at the minute. He's a bird smuggler, among other things. Very funny, interesting man. He did not a lot of time, but he did time in Boggo Road. And a fellow called John Gillespie, who died only 8 weeks ago in Melbourne. He was a con man and a crook, and he died just the other. I think he had 15 children with 3 wives or something ridiculous.
As you do. What about Darwin and Hobart? Seeing as you know these things.
The Falconio case in the Northern Territory is a big one.
Of course.
And of course. A dingo got my baby, which of course the dingo did.
And we have to then note that one was not a crime.
No,
that
not
was
a crime.
A misunderstanding.
A crime against Lindy Chamberlain.
Yep.
Perpetrated by the local police, politicians, and ultimately the judiciary.
Do you have strong theories on that one?
Oh, the bloody dogs did it. I mean, I've seen a dog pull a crossbred ewe. A crossbred ewe's only, would weigh, 2 of them would weigh what you do. Pull a big crossbred ewe along by the ear, like a rag doll. They are tremendously strong. And if you doubt that, look at huskies pulling sleds. Sleds weighed down with enormous weights.
Because we're in an absolute minefield here, I'll delicately tiptoe out. What about Hobart?
Dr. Rory, the American, who chopped his wife into like 72 bits and fed her down the plug hole, and I think it blocked the plumbing.
Was that a yacht?
No, it's another one. That's another one. That is controversial. That was Chapman, the death of Dr. Bob Chapman, or Mr. Bob Chapman.
Somebody wrote to me not long ago about the murder on the yacht.
Yes.
Gave me box and dice saying, it was a massive miscarriage of justice.
Oh, they're very keen on...
Like 10 years of investigations awaited, for that one. I don't know anything about it. I just remember thinking, wow, I'd never heard of that.
It's controversial. The wife, or the de facto wife, was a sort of a broken down Hobart socialite. She came from one of the old 1803 Hobart families, and she'd run out of money and she'd lived reasonably humbly, but it would appear, and she was convicted, that she set up her partner's untimely demise out on the yacht. But there's very strong emotions about it on both sides.
The other one that, again, from Sydney that I'm sure you know, and I know a fair bit about it because I was a young man, very young man at the time, but you'll know much better than me, the extortion attempt on Qantas, where they said there's a bomb on board, and if you don't give us money, we'll blow it up. That one, or we won't tell you where it is. And somehow or other, Newport Beach in Sydney was involved. And because my family's had for the last 100 years, has had a holiday house there, I think as a young fella, my ears pricked up that Newport was somehow involved in this crime of the century. What was that? The Combi? What was that case? The Combi?
I think it involved some pretty good gangsters and racing identities, that one, but I might be wrong. There's a couple of crimes involving aircraft. One of them was where Bertie Kidd got himself put onto an aeroplane in a crate So that I think it was he or one of his partners in crime, and his idea was he's going to break out of the crate in the hold of the aircraft during the flight and break into the crate next to it, which was full of used cash. And
Good story.
somebody noticed something wrong as they were loading it, perhaps noticed his finger sticking out the top or something, and they were foiled. But it was a terrific plot, wonderful plot.
Great plot.
Providing
The only thing, if you were at 30,000 feet and you were in a crate in the cargo hold, it'd be cold and not a lot of oxygen.
I did think about that. I don't think I'd want to do it, but maybe it was a short haul, or I don't know. I'm not sure of the technical details, but maybe it wasn't going to be a long flight or necessarily that high. I'm not sure.
How well known in Melbourne, which I presume most of your listeners are from, how well known is the Shark Arm murder?
I think people of my vintage have possibly read a bit about it, but I'm the sort of guy that will have read a lot of things. I think it's sufficiently old that it's new again and that you could easily tackle it again.
Yeah, well,
it's like doing Ben Hall or whatever. It's well worth doing, again.
I wrote about it, I think, 10 years ago, and I think a book has just come out about it because I was interested to see that I was quoted, I think, on the cover or sides. But yes, the Shark Arm murder.
The Shark Arm murder is a good one. So I hope that as you keep doing books, and you're only a youngster at 64, a Beatles song and all that over the next 20 years you might include some of these crime stories.
Well, next time you have me on, I want to talk to you about Ned Kelly, because I wrote a book on Ned Kelly and he could fill a book, and he did fill a book.
He's filled a lot. And they're not all funny, but there are some funny and very touching stories about Ned Kelly.
Thank you for having me on, and thank you for promoting my book on Weary Dunlop.
And it is called
The Courageous Life of Weary Dunlop.
A very good title by Peter FitzSimons, who is a prolific author and a great Australian in his own quiet way.
You're more than kind. Thank you. See you, mate.
Thanks for listening. Life and Crimes is a Sunday Herald Sun production for True Crime Australia. Our producer is Jonty Burton. For my columns, features and more, go to heraldsun.com.au/Andrew Rule, one word. For advertising inquiries, go to newspodcastssold@news.com.au. That is all one word, newspodcastssold. And if you want further information about this episode, links are in the description.